Hello and welcome to the Future of Work podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about transnational British education and the use of AI in assessments. Joining us today, all the way from Vietnam, we're very delighted to have Dr. Mike Perkins, the head of the Center for Research and Innovation at British University, Vietnam. Dr. Mike, it's a great pleasure having you on our podcast today.
Thank you so much, Mona and Vic, for having me. It's really nice to be here with you today.
Dr. Mike, could you please start off by introducing yourself and you are doing at the Center for Research and Innovation, please?
Of course. Thanks, Mona. I'm the head of the Center for Research and Innovation at British University Vietnam. Just to give you some context, British University Vietnam is a private university located in just outside of Hanoi in Vietnam, and we've been in operation for around 15 years now. And we offer a range of UK degree programs to students who can get the opportunity to study for their undergraduate programs in BUV before potentially transferring over to UK higher education in the UK itself. Now, in terms of my role, I am responsible for developing and managing our research culture in the university. We're primarily a teaching-focused university, but we're now at the stage where we're growing and developing our aspirations and expanding this to support all of our faculty and staff in their research goals. So my job and the centre's remit is to try and support all of that and all of those activities to help increase our research output, our research productivity, and our research impact as well.
And, building on from that, why do you think international students value UK higher education qualifications?
UK education has always been at the forefront of many international students' minds, and whether this really often sits in that sort of top level of it's US, Canada, UK, and Europe, and this is where there's a lot of international students really looking all the time at engaging in some of these educational systems. Partly it's the history. UK higher education is one of the biggest providers of education, and everybody knows this system as being of extremely high quality, very rigorous. And therefore, from this rigor, we've got the recognized standards. So having this ability for students to say, well, I have a UK degree, that is extremely portable, no matter where they are, because very different to some contexts where the local degree programs may not match up with international criteria, or the credit systems might not be so transferable on the ECTS systems. But UK, there's always going to be that ability to have this confidence to employers, to local regulators say this is a quality degree. So apart from kind of the technical aspect of saying, yeah, well, we know that the UK is going to be a good degree because it's valued on an international basis, we have to think about why it's going to be valued. And I think that comes down to a lot of the ways that we teach and the ways that we learn in UK higher education systems. It's something that I've experienced many times at BUV. We see students enter into the university context, and it's a very different style of education, much more learner focused. Not necessarily the instructor focus that some educational systems do often focus on in terms of a bit more of a rote learning. We see the UK higher education landscape being more dominated by inquiry-led thinking. What is it that the student can develop their skills on, alongside very clear learning outcomes. And again, it's going to be in English. So this degree from a UK program in English that is very highly accredited I think this is going to be very valuable. So this is, I think, for me, why international students value UK higher education qualifications more broadly. It travels very well. Those quality mechanisms are transparent, they're trusted, and they are very marketable for the students who hold them.
Dr.
Yeah,
Vic, you worked in Vietnam and you had many students over there as well. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, and specifically to really how can students partner in partner countries increase their access to British universities?
right. Mike is absolutely right. The history behind British education is one of value to most students. And if you trace this back all the way to the medieval times, um, the first English-speaking university that was set up in the English-speaking world was Oxford, 1098, thereabout, following straight from Bologna in Italy, 1088. And although many years ago, British citizens have to travel to Paris to go to University of Paris to study there, that was reversed by King Henry VII or the King Henry VIII. So it has not always been a brilliant start for the British society, but as soon as they get a handle over it, it became extremely good place to study. Oxford have been doing a great job, and Mike mentioned all the Russell groups. Students, when they were sampled by Times Higher Education, 70% plus said that they value UK education because of its quality. Another 80% said that British education offers them mobility, so they get progression in their jobs. Something we can say about universities that spread around the world. Certainly, Oxford is not the first university, or Bologna is not the first university. If you read some of the history, to tell you the first university, Al Qarawiyyin University in Morocco was the first one, 859. But if you look at the ranking, Times Higher Education ranking, QS ranking, those universities don't feature. And that's because of the quality we have. UK has only 165 universities. 160 of those are public universities. So the government has a standing behind these universities that make it more attractive to students instead of the element of highly commercialized institutions, 4,000 of them in the United States, about 3,000 in India, about another 3,000 in China. I'm not saying the commercial interest does not provide good quality, but again, where you have a government overseeing what you do in a higher education, you tend to do it much better. And I think that's one of the reasons why students in particularly the eastern part of the world, from GCC all the way to Philippines, they tend to value British education. I know there's some sort of monopoly in the South American market where students from Venezuela, Cuba, and Mexico perhaps will go to the United States. It's not so much the case. British education is valued strongly in Europe and also now, particularly these days, in Asia. And that's because of what Mike has said earlier on. Our quality standards are very, very high. QAA is always behind us. Recently, we have OFS that has been set up to ensure that students are getting value for their money.
Dr. Mike, from your experience then, how can British universities operating abroad ensure that they retain their quality standards that you've talked about?
Okay, so I think a lot of this is down to the partnerships that those institutions have in place with their UK-based partners. For example, BUV, we have several partnerships in place, and therefore we have to operate within the standards of each individual university. But apart from that, I think having this ability to have some sort of external quality recognition is really, really valuable. And so for us, we went towards the path of QAA IQR, the International Quality Review Program. But there are methods in all countries for a separate sort of quality accreditation, whether that's with the local educational providers or whether that's with other international providers, often from Europe, who will provide a quality standard under a different branch. Now, for us as a British university providing British degrees, it made sense for us to go down the QAA route. And a lot of this comes down to broad standards of what does quality mean in UK higher education, and things like having elements of transparency and trust in the results that we can actually provide, giving a good student experience, making sure that we are able to support students where we can, get the best faculty where we can. It's things that form the cornerstones of UK higher education. It's not the nuts and bolts of how many students, what's your student to teacher ratio, or how many square meters of space do you have per student, or how many computers do you have. A lot of those sort of box ticking exercises can result in universities achieving quality just at the very basic level, but then not being able to progress more in the thinking. So I think a UK focus on, or rather a UK approach to quality, is something that's going to be really helpful for universities to develop this level of quality assurance for the students who are taking their programs. And then this is going to help with further partnerships as well. If you go to a UK partner and you say, well, we already have an international quality review by QAA, they're going to say, okay, well, we have a bit more trust in you, rather than just starting off a relationship without anything like that.
Great.
Yeah, if I were to go into a bit of the technical details of that, what Mike has said, we are aware that in British education, higher education, we have a process for assessment. So you normally would have a second marker or a moderator for the process. And when Mike talks about transparency, that's evident in this process, something that some other universities don't have. And I have spoken to colleagues who said they're not familiar. This is a very British way of doing things.
North America doesn't have these at all. You say to a North American professor, someone's going to be checking your marks, and go, absolutely not. This is outrageous.
Yeah. So that sets us apart from other jurisdictions where they don't have those processes.
Great. Thank you very much. I'd like to now move on to talk about AI and assessments. And I know, Dr. Mike, you've done a lot of work in that area, which I'm really looking forward to learning about. We know that the rise of Gen AI tools is really creating new integrity challenges for both universities and students. A lot of articles in the news and that we read have reported that universities saying that there are soaring suspected cases of AI facilitated misconduct. And reading through some of your work, Dr. Mike, I hope I got this one right, but you talk a lot about the post-plagiarism era. And how AI misuse becomes a grading issue rather than an academic integrity one. Could you please tell us a little bit about this? And, when you talk about the post-plagiarism era, what exactly do you mean by this?
Sure. So post-plagiarism is a term that was developed by Professor Sarah Eaton at University of Calgary. I was just visiting University of Calgary last week. And it's the concept that says that we are, regardless of AI, moving into a system where we can't necessarily fully assure that a student has done their work themselves. We used to be able to say, well, if we need to really guarantee trust in student work and be able to evidence that process that students have gone through for their learning, we have an exam. And that's fantastic. So we can sit students in exams. Whether they're a valid form of assessment or not is one thing, but they can be a secure form of assessment if done well. But post-plagiarism refers to the time that is coming up very, very soon that means we're no longer going to be able to fully secure that assessment. So once we have the first brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, and you can see students who are in an exam and you can't control their ability to access the outside world and outside information. Suddenly that means plagiarism as a concept becomes very difficult because there would be this expectation that everybody would have access to this information all at once. So this post-plagiarism is how we think about the next stages of assessment development and measuring student learning more broadly in terms of that evidence of learning and that validity of assessment. So a lot of my work has revolved around looking at how generative AI, Gen AI, has helped link this concept of post-plagiarism with the idea of, it's about validity matters more than cheating. It is another concept, Professor Phil Dawson. It's something that we think about. What is it that we're valuing in the assessments that we're providing to our students? Do we want to make it so that they learn, or do we want to make it so that they don't cheat? Because those are two separate things that we can't always control at the exact same time. If we do an exam at present time, we can generally be pretty sure or have some higher level of certainty that students aren't cheating in the same way. But we know that exams aren't always going to be the best method of actually assessing student learning. So is it going to be an authentic assessment? Is it going to have a content validity? Are we going to be able to really tell that the student has understood what's going on here? And we're already seeing now with the Meta AI glasses, Meta Ray-Ban glasses, that so suddenly you can have a student in an exam and Vic, how do I know that you don't have a little screen in your glasses looking at the page and feeding you the answers? It's
Impossible.
we don't know these things. Yeah. And once that becomes away from those, okay, so suddenly you can't have glasses, suddenly you can't have watches, so there's nothing in the exam room. But once that's inside your contact lenses or inside your brain, we move away from something being able to detect that. So thinking about generative AI use as a grading issue is about recognizing that these technologies are really going to be here to stay. So if we have a technology that is in broad use and that students are going to be expected to use on a regular basis by their employers, that's not the future. That is already today. We have, announcements from Shopify made the news, even last year, saying that there's an expectation that if you want to hire somebody new in Shopify, you've got to prove that generative AI tools can't simply be used to do that role instead. So this expectation that students will be using AI is growing. Whether that's feeding down into our practices in higher education is something different. And it's something that we've been looking at in BUV, and myself and some other colleagues, Leon Furs, Jason McFaul, and Jasper Rowe, we have developed a system called the AI assessment scale. Now, the AI assessment scale is a tool that's used by more than 350 schools and universities worldwide. It's translated into more than 30 languages. And we developed this as a framework to help universities think about where they might look at integrating these tools into their assessment practices. So when I say it's about assessment becomes less about plagiarism and more about a grading use, this is saying, how can we design assessments in an appropriate way for students to actually use generative AI in a ethical manner? So can we give them opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge in a way that doesn't get rid of the assessment validity that we have, but also allows them to use these different tools? So I can talk about the AI assessment scale later, but that's the sort of general idea that we say using generative AI isn't a specific form of misuse if it's done appropriately. Because just using generative AI doesn't mean that you're cheating. It just means that you're using a new form of a tool. But from the educator's perspective, we have to start to develop systems and put those systems in place that allow students to do this in an appropriate way without just trying to say, no, you can't use generative AI and then yelling, you're cheating when students inevitably do that. It's not something we can really restrict very easily.
Yes, yes. So let me now ask Dr. Vic, from your experience in the classroom, what challenges have you faced in terms of assessments and students using these new tools as part of their research for their projects and so on?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, human beings have the tendency to cut corners. If they can, they will, because there's an incentive for doing so. If you know you're not going to be caught, you will cheat. And I think that's the default position with which most student academic dishonesty occur. So what has happened over the past few years is pretty simple, that instead of finding ways where previously they would scribble things on their palm, on their thighs, pieces of paper, and go into the exam to use those materials, it has moved to, if it's a coursework assignment, they will find ways around that, a quicker way. And Gen AI seems to be the tool that can help to do that very quickly. Now, at the institutional level, it's quite difficult to tell the scale of this practice. But what I have noticed is that there can be some careless use of these Gen AI tools. So where a student, for example, has used it and ChatGPT produces a response, but then they copy this together with, would you like me to reframe this for you? And they copied that together with the output. That is quite negligent, in my view. Mike is absolutely right. There's not a lot we can do at the moment. It's here to stay, Gen AI is. So I have seen episodes of student misuse of those tools, the same way they would have done if there was no tool of such nature. It's down to institutional policy to mitigate these activities. And I know universities, including where you and I work, there are policies about this to tell us how to approach the use of AI. And we are allowed to let students use AI in our classes to do a number of things. So there is a limit to what they can do and what they can't do. And I think that's the premise with which I work. It's very difficult to catch, particularly with coursework. But that's where we are. I saw some statistics yesterday that about 7,000 proven cheating cases have been reported in the UK alone. That was June this year. Times Higher Education reports that that's an extraordinary number of cheating cases. But what is also interesting is that whereas traditional plagiarism has gone down, cheating with AI has gone up. And as I said at the beginning, I think this is down to the incentives that students think they can get from using those shortcuts. I honestly don't know how we will be tackling this 5-10 years from now, because Gen AI is just going to get more robust, more advanced, and it will also be misleading to say that let's go back to exams.
Absolutely. So going back to what Dr. Mike said about how we can use this new tool rather than completely banning it, because like you, Dr. Vic, in the class, when I say to students, okay, use this AI tool to help you with this, some of them are quite surprised that, oh, can we actually use that? And so it's all about how to use it ethically. And going back, Dr. Mike, I liked what you mentioned about, we have to differentiate between, do we want students to learn, or do we want to make sure they're not cheating? So if we then focus on learning and making sure that our students learn, what could be some of the assessments tools, let's say, that could be used to ensure active and continuous learning is taking place?
Okay. I think in terms of considering the Gen AI usage, I think moving more towards authentic assessment in the classroom situations is going to be really important. And especially when we talk about for social science disciplines that we're operating in, this is not a difficult thing to do, to say, okay, well, this is the task that you are going to be doing in your job, demonstrate your capability of doing this task. And it doesn't really matter whether or not you have access to different tools, because those are tools that you will have access to during your role. What we're testing is your ability to use these. So if a student is using generative AI and they're producing Gen AI slop and just copying and pasting things that they don't understand or that doesn't really answer the question, then they're going to achieve low marks, because it's just like if you carry out a task poorly at your job, you're going to get told by your boss, this is not good work. It's not going to be having people saying you're cheating by using these tools, but you're going to have people saying that you haven't done an effective job of actually doing that. So things that I do, I integrate generative AI into my practices by getting students to work with these tools as kind of like collaborators and co-workers. And I'll give them specific prompts or custom GPTs to work with as if they're working in a much larger team. And so this is a team member who's producing some work and they are a junior member of the team. You're a senior. Your role is to actually check what's being produced, make sure that it's correct, and bring this together with the rest of your knowledge to produce something that the client or your boss is actually looking to achieve. So recognizing that when we work in a business environment, that we're actually going to have this broad use of different tools and technologies and rely on different people to do different things. Trying to bring all of those together in some form of more authentic assessment, I think, is a really big way to achieve that. Coupled with that, though, I think there are certain times where we do have to use more secured forms of assessment. So one of the first level in the AI assessment scale that we state is actually no use of AI. Now, it's no good to just say to a student, you can't use AI, now go and write a 1,000-word essay on this topic, because students are going to go, yeah, sure, I'll definitely won't use any AI tools, and they'll go and do whatever they want. As Vic was saying, they use shortcuts. Humans are programmed to do that. But what we can do is we can say, do you know, there are some things that are really fundamental to our learning and to the requirements of this course, that when we think about the learning objectives that we're trying to achieve, the only way we can tell whether or not a student has genuinely internalized this concept is to test it in some form of a more secure assessment. Now, that could be an exam, sure. Doesn't have to be an exam, though. It could be a practical demonstration. Show me how you can do this under an exam condition. It could be a presentation. It could be a discussion that students are having. It could be a viva that you have with students, once they've submitted a piece of work. Just something that has some element of assessment security, where we can say that there is, yes, we have to have learning methods and assessment methods that allow students to demonstrate the full range of their potential, but sometimes we do have to focus on some of those core elements, and that is when we do have the benefits of exams. And I'm definitely not suggesting that we should be throwing all exams away because students have chips in their brains. We're not there yet. I think at the moment we can still use exams in an appropriate way to help support the validity of assessments. And I think this is a bit of a challenge for UK higher education, because we have seen on, I think, a sector-wide basis, a bit of a move away from exams as a form of assessment, because exams are very difficult for universities to do. They have to arrange the space for large cohorts. They have to pay for invigilators. They have to arrange full sets of marking systems that do cost a lot of money and time, whereas it's a lot easier to say to a student, we're going to have more short form continuous assessment throughout the semester, and we can assess your knowledge that way. Maybe we could have done, but now I think we still do have to have a bit of a balance of both those continuous authentic assessments, as well as some clear points where we know that what the student is doing is their own work. And that's how we can get this sort of joined up thinking in terms of assessment security and assessment validity, and making sure that we're able to test students on their learning effectively.
Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Dr. Vic, before I move on to the assessment scale in more detail with Dr. Mike?
No, I would say that AI, certainly if used appropriately, particularly for generating initial ideas for assignments, can be quite useful. It flattens the playing field for native speakers versus non-native speakers. Historically, if students came from non-native speaking environments, they will struggle to articulate their ideas correctly. And if used correctly, AI can help such students to improve their writing, which makes our life easier because when we are grading, we can understand what they are saying compared with previously where you will struggle to understand what the student is saying in a sentence, in a paragraph, and in the whole essay. So I think there's some advantage there. I still struggle to sort of implement AI tools in my assessment that prevent gross misconduct or sort of misconduct of a kind. And that's purely because it's a new tool and British higher education hasn't yet caught up with legislation to mitigate potential issues. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon because AI is running so fast and we are behind trailing like Achilles.
All right, so the last question for our episode today is really focusing on the assessment scale, Dr. Mike. I know this is, I'm personally very fascinated by the scale. I'd love to learn more about it. And, having heard about how successful it is and how many, institutions are adopting it, would like to learn a little bit, just in-depth summary, if you like, about the tool and why it's now more important than ever that universities adopt such a scale in the age of AI.
Okay, so I think in a nutshell, we've got a range of things that have all led to the AI assessment scale sort of picking up and people running with this. When generative AI came out, this was a huge challenge for higher education institutions. People didn't know what to do. And essentially, they had three different ways that they could go about doing things. Now, the first one that many universities, especially in Australia, did, they were very quick to recognize this risk. And the group of 8 universities, so the equivalent like the Russell Group in the UK, uh, jumped straight away to cancelling all take-home assessments. And they said, what we're going to do until we get a handle on this, we are going to go down an exam-only basis. Like, okay, great. So they suddenly said that assessment security was a very important topic. But as we've talked about before, assessment security is not the only thing. We do have to recognize assessment validity. And saying to students that we're only going to have exams, that means that their learning is very secure, but it's not necessarily very authentic. And then when you have students graduate and they're expected to carry out a task given a broader range of resources to draw on, are they going to have the full skills to be able to actually do that? So many universities say that one of their graduate outcomes or their graduate attributes is that students are really ready to engage with the world of work. And we can't say with all honesty that we're going to be supporting our students in the future world of work if we don't train them how to use tools like generative AI in an effective way. If all they're doing is using this in their personal lives, they're really not going to develop those skills to do something in a really effective manner for their future work. So we say, okay, well, we can't use exams for everything. But if we're going to use assessments, we want to know what the student's learning and what the student's not learning. So the thing that many institutions started to draw on is things like AI detection tools. And the challenge is that EdTech sort of came ahead and said, don't worry, universities, we've seen this rise of ChatGPT, and now we can save you from all these cheating students. So what we'll do is we've got this magical tool that will, with 99% accuracy, tell you or not whether a student has used generative AI in their work. And what we found from actual research that I've done along with colleagues and other researchers around the world is that these tools are nowhere near as accurate as they're claimed. Both false positives and false negatives, these accuracy rates are not true, just simply not true, and become even less accurate when we start to talk about specifically trying to hide the use of these tools. You know, students can go on TikTok and they can find 10 different ways that they can make sure that their assessment isn't picked up by whatever system their university is using. You know, AI humanizer tools, which will take the output of generative AI and change words in it in a way that will make it sound less like these patterns that you get from generative AI tools. And so suddenly then that means that we've got this arms race between a Gen AI detection tool and an AI humanizer. And now the Gen AI detection tools even have checks to say, has this been run through a humanizer? And it's just going to be this ongoing process. And that's not really what we want, especially from UK higher education. UK higher education relies a lot on trust that goes both ways, but we do have responsibilities to check that as well. So if we can't go back to exams for everything, and if we can't rely on a technological method to detect whether or not students are actually using these tools, what can we do instead? Well, we've got to think of some way that we can actually have this form of integration of generative AI tools into our assessments. And the AI assessment scale is one way that we've developed to help support educators to actually do this. And it works by doing two main things. The first thing it does is it offers a framework for educators to redesign their assessments based on their learning objectives, what they're trying to achieve from a specific form of assessment, and saying, how much will students using Gen AI tools for this assessment cause this learning outcome to be more or less met? And based upon the answers to that question, we can say, well, there may then be ways that we want to integrate Gen AI into this assessment. And in some cases, this may be to a very high degree. In other cases, this might be to a much lower degree. And that gives us these sort of base levels to work from. And secondly, it opens up a conversation between the students and educators, because I mentioned about this concept of trust in higher education. That is really important to have. And being able to have open conversations with students about, these are my expectations for you, and this is how I think you should be acting, is a really clear way to help support academic integrity. Now, academic integrity has been shown time and time again that if you have a broad culture of academic integrity, this is going to be more effective than sort of plagiarism checking systems, because if you instill in students a belief in what they're actually doing is going to be right, this is going to be really helpful. Now, some skeptics would say, no, we've got to have both, and I would probably agree. We do need both sides of that coin. We've got to have some sort of checks and balances, but trust is also something that's really important. So the AI assessment scale, it's a 5-level system where we go from having no AI, and as we say, we can have some form of a secured assessment, and then we move throughout the different levels of the scale. Maybe we say we're going to design an assessment which is focused on AI planning. So you ask students to carry out some planning activities, and the goal is to assess the end result. It's not to assess where these ideas came from. It's assessing the ability of the students to understand which ideas are effective, which ideas are not effective, and combine that together into a piece of work. We may then move beyond that and say, well, we're going to say, yes, you can use AI for some certain tasks like drafting text or revising text or reviewing material. But what's important here is your critical evaluation. We're not trying to say, which words did you write and which words did the AI tool write? We're trying to address a more broader focus on how has AI been used here to help support your work. And we might do this through reflective statements, through transparency statements, disclosure statements. But what's important is that the student's able to have a bit of an evaluation as to whether or not what the AI tool is producing is correct. But for that, we've got to adjust our grading levels as well. If we know that students have access to more sources, then we expect students to do better. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen is when educators just say, okay, yeah, you can use AI, but then they keep their same old grading standards. And what that can lead to is grade inflation and degrading of degree programs. We've already seen in the UK this constant rise in the number of the first class degrees that are being awarded. And there's been calls by sectors to say, is this really appropriate? Do we want this continued grade inflation? Now, as we get higher up the levels of the AI assessment scale, move into saying, well, we can actually have cases where the students can be using full AI. So in a full AI assessment, this would be where there would probably be some sort of an expectation or a demand that students do use Gen AI tools to achieve certain aspects of their work. Maybe that's using specific prompts, getting them to put in a prompt into ChatGPT and sharing the link to that prompt so you can see how well the student has worked with this activity. Maybe it's doing specific forms of creation like multimodal generation. So text generation, yeah, sure. But what about video generation? What about digital avatar creation? What about voice creation? How can students integrate these effectively into a multimedia presentation in a short amount of time that really wouldn't have been possible to do without access to these tools? And then at the final level of the scale, we have this AI exploration, this sort of cutting edge level that we say we're now going to be moving towards this bigger case use where we say, what are the biggest problems that we're facing? How can we design an assessment with students that involves some sort of a co-creation, looking at the cutting edge of generative AI tools? So we say, this is a case where students are really trying to explore how well these tools can be used to do something. And therefore, one of the learning objectives would be related specifically to generative AI tools. Again, I think it's important to differentiate between what the student knows and what the AI tool can do. And we shouldn't be saying that we should be doing everything at a very high level of AI tools. We've got to have some sort of appropriate use case. But also, when you give an assessment to a student and you can say you can use AI for this or you can use AI for that, that is not good enough because students will ignore you. You say, here's my assessment. Now you can only use AI for planning. And a student will go, yeah, sure. And then they'll just do the whole thing using AI. So it's not about relying on students to sort of meet our criteria. What it really is important is about redesigning assessment. And I think that is the challenge that many universities face because assessment redesign is a difficult thing to do. How many hours have you both spent designing assessments and thinking, how can I write this assessment in a way that's going to support my students? Well, then add in generative AI, where sometimes you're going to have educators who aren't experts in this, and this becomes a really, really big ask for many people. But it's something that universities have got to deal with. And from BUV, we deal with this through continuous faculty training, supporting people in how to redesign assessments for generative AI and using the AI assessment scale in an effective way to design an assessment that supports student validity and assessment validity, but also allows for effective student learning. And that's where we have this sort of balance. So that's the AI assessment scale in a bit of a nutshell, why we need to do these systems and some of the challenges that universities face and what these tools actually are. All of this information is available on our website, AIassessmentscale.com. We've got multiple peer-reviewed papers exploring these topics in different details and a whole range of resources available on our website if people are interested in adapting this scale, which is a Creative Commons scale and can be freely adapted, changed, translated using whichever context you would like.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Mike Perkins. Certainly a very informative session. I think many universities can learn and from this and really rethink about their assessment design and delivery. So thank you very much, Dr. Vic, Dr. Mike. Thank you so much for this episode. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mona, Vic. It's been a pleasure.